just a quick like double click on your childhood, your youth, little Natalie. From what I read, you were kind of like a straight A you were like a little hard on yourself.
Yeah.
And then you went to London. So like, tell me a little bit about your trajectory. Like, when did you kind of identify in yourself that this was your path?
It's funny. I don't think I identified this was my path until 5 years ago, like truly understand what I wanted to be, who I wanted to be. But when I was 8 years old, I do remember just feeling like I could impact the world. And my parents were both medical doctors, so they had very high expectations for grades. I got a straight A academic career because my parents would threaten that they wouldn't feed us if we didn't get straight A's. So it was kind of in jest. My parents are fantastic, but there was a very high performing environment that I grew up in. And by the time I got to college, it wasn't because I wanted to go to college. And to be honest with you, I realized fairly recently that most of my education was actually built on me thinking I needed to get an A, but not really understanding what I was doing. And so when I got to college and realized that I didn't want to be in college, the most liberating thing that I did was drop out. And I always listened to Kanye West's College Dropout albums, my favorite album of all time. I think that was like some foreshadowing to what life was going to end up being like for me, because the single most empowering decision that I've made in my life today was making the decision to drop out of college and rid myself of what my parents thought I was going to be, which they were well-intentioned and again, fantastic people, but it wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't who I wanted to be. And I created this different alternative route for myself.
That was dropping out of the London School of Economics. Was there any kind of story or moment? Like, just take me there for a minute, because I think anybody, at least myself, London just feels so magical. And I just am wondering what it was like to be in school there.
I was so depressed. The weather was depressing. I didn't know anybody. I was really insecure, and people were so freaking smart. And they actually understood things that I could figure out how to like work my way into an A around, but I didn't actually have this fundamental understanding of. And the moment was I was in my bedroom on a Sunday, about ready to spend the whole day studying. But before I started, I watched a TED Talk of Steve Jobs' Stanford graduation speech. And in the speech, he says, if you wake up too many mornings in a row and you look at yourself in the mirror and you are not proud of the person that you are and what you're doing, you have to do something different. All of a sudden, I'm like, I'm out. I'm leaving this place. I'm not doing this any longer. And so Steve Jobs was my inspiration for dropping out of college.
Well, there you go. He dropped it. Didn't he drop? He dropped out.
He did.
Yeah.
He sure did.
So you like packed up your bags and then called your parents, or like what was the process?
Yeah. My mom cried. My dad cried. Everybody told me not to do this. There wasn't a single person in my life that supported the decision. My friends, my parents, mentors, colleagues around me, because I also had a job at the time. And none of them, when I was like, guys, guess what? I can finally work more because I just dropped out of college. Not one person said, that's awesome. Most of them actually tried to convince me and like resell me on it. And they kind of conspired together in order to get me to go back. And I was like, I'm not doing it. This is the greatest decision I've ever made.
That's so admirable. I often tell this story, same thing. My mother, so well-intentioned. But when I told her I was leaving my corporate job, she was like, are you out of your mind? She was like, you don't leave a multi-six-figure job with health insurance. Oh, and I was pregnant.
Oh.
So fair assessment.
Can understand where mom was coming from.
But I was like, with all due respect, I think it's going to work. And thank God it did. But I'd always let her cloud my decisions before. I was very influenced. I wanted her approval. So I think it's very admirable that, how old were you? Like 19? Wow. That's very strong.
I don't know where it came from. I really don't. Steve Jobs inspired me.
Steve Jobs. So you come back, and at what point did you meet Brandon?
So I've known Brandon, my husband, since I was 12 years old. He was my neighbor growing up. And so I had been around him for a very long time and had taken an internship at his company 2 years prior to dropping out. And I went back and I started working at that company again because there was a dental opportunity that was like a sister company. And so I came back from London, started working in dental management consulting. And that really...
Exciting.
Yeah.
Riveting.
Right, like, woo, working in HR. So yeah, that's where he and I started working together. And he always says that I went to London. This is like kind of awkward and like a little weird to say. And I don't know why I'm telling the story. I cringe when he says it to people in real life, but here we are. He always says, you were a young girl when you went to London and you came back a woman. And like, I kind of want to vomit, but
But I also get it. So here's the thing. My husband's 20 years older than me. We're 44 and 64. And we joke about it all the time. Here's the funny thing. We actually grew up in the same town. And people are like, oh, did you know each other? I was like, mm-mm. But like we could have. I mean, we grew up down the road from one another. We just happened to not. We were introduced in New York much later on in life. But the reality is when you're an adult, and you're a fully formed person. And so when did you guys know? You were just there as an intern. When did feelings start to form?
It was about 6 months later. He had lost his executive administrative vice president who was working on all of his leadership programs, working on the facilities and administration, been with him for 8 years. And her husband got diagnosed with terminal cancer and I was reporting to her. So all of a sudden he had nobody to run his leadership program. And at the time, it's just like, oh, I can help coordinate these speakers. Like it wasn't some massive role, but it turned into that because I was there. I could do it. I was interested. I was really interested in leadership. And that started, I remember I picked up my first management consulting book at 12 called The Starbucks Experience, just like this actual very natural fascination in how you build brands and what it means to be a business owner. And so I didn't know anything. And that was evident for many, many years as I got experience. But I was naturally very interested in this topic of leadership and duplication and how you help people get from $1 million in revenue in your business to $5 million of revenue, which was the job for management consulting.
I mean, I got to be honest, Natalie, when I was 20, I was on the Hot Mess Express. I could barely, I was out all night at nightclubs in New York City. This is a big part of my story. In fact, my first episode is me and my mom talking about my addiction. I'm like 20 years sober, but
wow.
I could not hardly tie my shoes when I was 20 years old. How did you know? It seems like something deep inside you was preparing for this your whole life.
I think so. I really do. And I do give so much credit to my parents because they had such a great, loving, supportive, but also rigorous structure to our lives where, yes, there were high expectations, but they loved us. Like it was a really healthy home. And not to say that your home wasn't healthy or compare in that way, but I don't think that a lot of this was me innately. I think it was the environment and the way they protected us. Even until I left for college, I couldn't be out of the house until I think my curfew was 10 o'clock at night. And even at that point, it was like they knew where I was and there was no drink. There was none of that stuff. And I never found that I was interested in it because they were talking to me about what it was like, even though I couldn't experience it. So I just think my parents were really spectacular, to be honest with you, and created an environment where it was accessible, but they would never let me, but I could like understand and learn about it in a, I guess, accessible way.
So here you are, you're 24, as I understand the story to go. You're running this tech platform and the business fails. Do I have that right? So can you take me through that story and kind of, it sounds like maybe you went from like some forced bravado because you had to just be like, I've got this, to imposter syndrome. 1,000,000%.
That's exactly what happened. And especially when I started dating my husband, all of a sudden I'm in this position where people just literally kept leaving for random circumstances, like the woman whose husband got sick with cancer. It wasn't like he put me in these positions and I wanted to be in these positions. I knew I wasn't ready, but there was nobody else outside of hiring somebody. And so I just was like, okay, I'll do this. And I just kept saying yes. And the saying yes is actually what created so much insecurity in the long run for me, because I knew I was over my skis and people were so judgmental. And here I'm this 25-year-old girl. My husband is 25 years older than me. I look the way that I look. Like all of the apparency was actually shown in the results because this tech platform that our dental management consulting business was dependent upon, we found out that the connection that we had invested $1.2 million in ensuring that was going to work to be able to let us scale to all of these different independent dental practitioners. There was a break in this system and this negotiation and contract blew up with our supplier. So the business just didn't make sense. Like there really was no model. And I had to fire 50 people. I had to shut this company down. I had to transition the clients off these services. So everything that I already knew every single person was saying about me at that point was about to be true. And then like it wasn't imposter syndrome at that point. Like I literally was running this thing and it failed. So I suck. And on top of that, I had paralyzing fear around public speaking and communication because I had a really bad experience with giving one public speech that was so awful. It was supposed to be 45 minutes and I gave it in a matter of 4.5 minutes and then proceeded to stand at the front of the room while somebody from the back of the room gave the rest of my presentation for me. It was just mortifying. And so you couple my inability to communicate, my desire to be great, and I know I'm smart, with a failing business and terrible results. And it really led to a very deep, dark place for me for 2.5 years where I didn't want to talk about anybody, or I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I honestly just thought I was going to be a housewife because what do I have to contribute? I don't know what I'm doing. And my husband's successful, but I will never be able to create that.
It's wild. It's really amazing. And I know that so you guys got married in 2021. Mm-hmm. So it was a while before you actually got married. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering what you have kind of learned in overcoming this identity struggle. And also, like, has he helped? I mean, I think that he's a big player in that, correct? Do I have that right?
Him overcoming the identity issue?
Him helping you. It seems I've read some quotes where you said that he really pushed you and helped you ask questions of yourself that were really helpful in forming your confidence.
My husband is my greatest supporter and has believed in me more than I've believed in myself at so many pivotal moments. And I always had this vision of who I wanted to be. And what I appreciate most about the way that he's handled these different failures is he doesn't bullshit me when I'm doing something terribly. He has all of this experience. My husband is a business savant. He is brilliant, but I want to be just as good, if not better than him. So I'm really freaking competitive, but he's willing to not be competitive with me when I actually need to learn something and be honest about what my shortcomings are, while also being my biggest fan and allowing me to not give up on what the long-term picture of who Natalie Dawson becomes really looks like. So yes, he has been absolutely instrumental. I don't know how people stay in relationships with people who don't support them. My husband and I started dating when I was 20 years old. So I was in a very conservative household until I was 18. Then I was only at college for 2 years. I was in this very Christian group during those 2 years of college. My husband's the only person I've slept with. Yeah. He's only the third person that I've ever dated. So he and I just have this special thing. And it's so wild that it's like the story would be, from an outsider's perspective, this blonde, young intern. He's 25 years older. So it looks like all of the things, and yet it couldn't be any more different. Yeah. And so because that's actually the core of our relationship, we have so much trust, and it's like our little joke that it's everything that people think it's not.